All right. Hi, everybody. I'm John Lux. I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Welcome to Film Florida Friday. For those of you who have not been here before, Film Florida Fridays are interactive conversations about current topics, initiatives, relationship building in Florida's film, television, commercial, and digital media industry. Today, we're talking drone production and more. In a moment, our guests will introduce themselves. Then I'll ask some questions to get things going. During that time, we're going to ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute to avoid background noise. As always, after we've gotten started, after we've gotten through the audience, the initial questions, we'll open it up to the audience for questions and conversations. At that time, please use your hand raising function so we can call on you. We want this to be conversational and interactive, but we also don't want everybody talking at the same time. So we're going to ask everybody to keep their questions and comments brief in the interest of time and out of the fairness to others that want the opportunity. Film Florida Fridays are free as always, but we hope you'll consider donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. The donation link is in the chat box, or will be in the chat box, and it's also on our website. And with that, I want to introduce our guests. We have Chris Odom from Firefly Media, Robert Starling from Starling Productions, and Keith Colodny from Precision Aerial Filmworks. They're much better at giving their bios and backgrounds, so we're going to let them introduce themselves. Chris, you go ahead and go first.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Chris Odom, and I'm the owner and chief pilot for Firefly Media Group, specializing in drone cinematography. And we're based in Pensacola, Florida, serving Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, and Georgia.
Excellent. Robert?
Hey, good morning. I'm Robert Starling. I'm with Starling Productions, and we are a 43-year-old production company. And so we do a lot of different things. We're not just drone specialists, although drones are a lot of what we do. We produce, we have camera rentals, IDP, do other specialty camera work. So we're a bit different in that we don't just do drones. And I know that Chris and Keith do a lot of different things as well. But anyway, if you have a question, send it our way.
And Keith?
I'm Keith Colodny. I own Precision Aerial Filmworks. We specialize in aerial cinematography for television and cinema. We're based out of West Palm Beach area, servicing everywhere, worldwide.
Excellent. Well, thanks to all three of you for being here. We really appreciate it. And I really did emphasize the and more part of the drone production and more, because we do want to talk a little bit more than just drone stuff here. But all of you have been, in the industry a little while. Robert, you mentioned 43 years. I don't know how you've done that if you're only 45 years old, of course. But, Keith, or Chris, rather, I wanted to start with you. What were you focused on in the industry before you really turned your attention to drone stuff?
So my background, I started as a advertising photographer specializing in the marine industry. So for a long time, I was still based as the transition, the DSLR revolution happened, combined with the convergence of print kind of going by the wayside and digital media coming on. I kind of crossed over into motion production, I guess is what they called it at the time. And the big part of that was shooting on the water. Helicopters were a big part of that in that part of the world. And the budgets were being slashed. There was no real way, they couldn't afford aerials anymore. So as the drones started coming on, I kind of migrated over into that direction. But outside of the commercial photography stuff that I did, I'm also a camera operator, director of photography, and locations management. So I kind of side shifted all of my experience from the commercial photo world into film production.
And Robert, how about you? You mentioned a little bit of some of the extra stuff, but take us back, 10, 15 years ago before drones were even a thing. What was your focus?
Well, 35 years ago, we were already doing, I was an aerial cinematographer, and that was a pretty big part of our business. And it still is, whether it's a drone or a traditional a helicopter approach to doing it. And so in 1993, I was actually in a helicopter crash in the Gulf of Mexico off of Sanibel Island while I was shooting a job for Hilton. And it was all fine. I mean, we were all good. Nobody got hurt. And the next day I had to rent some cameras and another helicopter to go up and finish the job. But as helicopters became much more expensive, even our big clients, like the feature films and episodic television shows, that they couldn't afford helicopter anymore, or companies like MTV, they were like, gosh, we're just blown out of helicopter work. And so then when drones came about, it was something that I was keen to learn more about, to offer as a service for our clients. So we started drone work about late 2014, maybe 15. And immediately it became probably the fastest growing part of Starling Productions. We were located in Las Vegas at the time. And we were the first company to have the legal authorizations and waivers to fly on the Las Vegas Strip. And we worked with the FAA hand in hand on that, because in 2015-16, the FAA, they were still trying to figure out what to do with us. I think they really hoped we would go away, but we didn't. But so there was a lot of give and take back then. But now it's still a very important part of our business. Keith and Chris and I, we work as colleagues, not necessarily competitors, because we may compete for the same jobs at times, but we're colleagues, and that we can discuss all of that freely and openly. And so if somebody calls me and says, oh, well, Chris is going to do this super cheap, and I'm going to call Chris and say, Chris, are you really doing it for this? Or is this really the situation? And he'll go, no, this is my price. So, we all discuss that between each other, because that collaboration and working as a colleague in the business makes us all stronger as an industry and all stronger as companies. So that's my background and how aerial cinematography came our way.
Good. Keith, how about you? What were you doing prior to getting into drones so much?
I think my story is a little bit different.
Right.
I was out in California, and I was in film school. And I worked at Universal Studios, and from everything from a PA runner, everything that needed to be done. And I ended up moving back to Florida when Universal opened in 1990, and then took a different career path and went back to school and joined the fire department as a paramedic firefighter. But while I was there, I noticed they didn't have any media services. So I started their media services group, got back into film. While I was working in the fire department, once I established that, we started a production company where we started filming outside commercial work. And then I was promoted to the trauma helicopter, which basically changed everything, and started flying RC helicopters. This is back in, I guess, 2004, 2005. And immediately wanted to start putting cameras on them. So we started putting cameras on RC helicopters, very difficult to fly, started getting calls from production companies, doing a lot of work, but we took it slow, because I was pretty much under the impression, as difficult as it was, and we had to actually modify and build our own systems, there was no hurry, there was no competition. And then drones came out and we were like, we need to do something. So we incorporated in 2012 and started moving to drones, started working with National Geographic and Discovery Channel and HGTV, and drones started to change again, where they were separated into groups and niche groups, smaller drones and small commercial real estate development stuff. And then there was flying the red camera. And we had to decide if we wanted to compete with 9,000 people on a job or 9 people on a job. So we shifted to mainly heavy lift, but kept our smaller ones too, but just shifted our focus. And I retired from the fire department in 2.5 years ago. And now it's, it was full-time then. It has slowly taken over from fire department to the drone industry, 20-80, and then it was 50-50, and then it was 70-30, and now it's 100%. So we've been around since flying drones and aircraft since 2008 and 9, incorporated as a drone company in 2012. And now that's pretty much all we do. We do other camera movement with Black Arm and some other equipment like our rover, but it's 90% drone.
Yeah. So Chris, I want to talk licensing. What type of licensing does a reputable, that's the important part, reputable drone operator have to obtain, and what does it take to obtain those licenses?
So the number one here in the U.S., the number one requirement for licensing is Part 107 from the FAA. So that's essentially the components are you need to learn how to read airspace maps and determine the airspace. You need to know weather, and you also need to learn how to use the Odom system and the TFRs. And that's essentially what the Part 107 is. The FAA just wants to make sure that you are aware, spatially aware of where you're launching your aircraft into the airspace for a job. So unfortunately, it's good and it's bad. Like I could go down a rabbit hole with you about my thoughts on the licensing process. But essentially it's like, I think it's a 50 question test or 70, I forget now. But essentially it's just a test that you can study for. A lot of free resources. You go to the FAA. Actually, now it's changed. It's all online now. You just had to go to a testing center, but it's pretty straightforward. I wish that they would incorporate some sort of checkout ride, something physically where an instructor observes someone operating a drone. Like for example, I'm certified in Canada. I'm certified in EASA, which is all the European nations, and I've had to go through that process. Every other country outside of the U.S. has that component to their licensing process, except for us, for whatever reason. And that's a little frustrating because if you've been around this business long enough, you've heard a bunch of horror stories with people who say they're licensed, but they're not really proficient. Yeah. And so that's a little something that we have as an industry we need to overcome.
So in comparison,
if you go on any of the forums, people say, hey, I just bought my first drone. How do I start my business? How do I start my drone business? Yeah. I see that every day.
Yeah.
So when you compare it to getting a driver's license where you have to do the book test and then you get out on the road, and there is nothing like that in the drone side.
Not in the US. Yeah.
And the difference between a driver's license is for the most part, we've all grown up in cars. We with our parents. So you're getting like driver's education your entire life as you're being shuttled around as a kid. And the drone business is not that way. And I think, so we do drone workshops as well. And I think what I see is a lot of people, they think they can just, study a little bit, skim through it, and they can go in and take the test. And it's not a difficult test, but it's not a gimme test either, because there's some important things in there that you really need to know about airspace and how it works. And I think where the test sort of falls down and leaves a new licensed pilot in a bad position, there's really no education on how to go about flying in restricted airspace. And part of that is just because the FAA has changed the rules in the 4 years I've known Keith, a little over 4 years now. I mean, they change the rules all the time. All of a sudden, they don't even tell you. You just log in one day and it's like, oh, it's totally different now. It's not the way we used to do it. So they've struggled to communicate with us and also give these folks the tools, because I see people, they go in, they want to do a job. Maybe they're probably flying legitimately. They just want to do an honest piece of work. And they get in and it's confusing to them and there's nobody really to help them. And kind of they get to a point they're like, oh, well, screw it, right? And I can tell you that Keith and Chris and I and anybody who's been doing this for 5 or 6 years, I mean, we've been through some pretty ugly periods with the FAA.
Absolutely.
And yeah, nobody ever books a job 3 months in advance. Well, I have like 2 clients in my whole career. They book that far in advance. They want to shoot tomorrow or they want to shoot in 5 days. And there was a point where it was, you would apply for an authorization to fly and it was 30, 60, 90, maybe, right? You didn't know.
90,
and how
maybe.
do you 90,
maybe never.
Exactly.
Maybe never, yeah. And they didn't tell you it was going to be never.
Yeah.
Well, Keith, so somebody gets their license, but then there's all kinds of regulations. Talk about some of the regulations that that, you know, just because you have a license doesn't mean you can go anywhere and do anything you want with it. So talk a little bit about that.
No, and that's changed. In the beginning, when drones first came out, you know, before that, you just flew an RC aircraft at an RC park. Now people are out in the middle of the street shooting a movie. There's no regulation. So the FAA came out and they banned all drones as soon as they started. And you had to have an exemption called a 333 exemption. So to get that, you had to be a licensed pilot. And luckily, all my pilots were licensed pilots. So we ended up doing a lot of work white label for other companies who now, all of a sudden, they started this company, they have investors, and legally they can't fly. Yeah. Then they came out with the Part 107 that Chris talked about, and they simplified it a lot. And after they came out with that, that basically said the general rules were if you're licensed and you're in unregulated airspace, you can fly up to 400 feet, can't fly over people, can't fly at night unless you have a waiver to fly at night. You know, they're very simple rules. Couldn't fly within 5 miles of an airport. Well, that's changed. And now they have the LAANC LANC system, which, what is it, a low altitude aircraft
authorization
system or certification. And they basically took a grid and plopped it all on all airports and targets that they feel is necessary, like courthouses, jails. And it's broken into boxes. And each box has a number in it. And that number is the maximum altitude you can fly, starting with a 0 in the middle of the airport and moving out 50, 100, 150. But you still have to be licensed and you have to file for that LANC authorization. You get it immediately unless you want to go higher than that altitude that's in that box. So they have simplified it a lot, and they have changed other rules. Like now with the new testing, you can fly at night. There is something in there that says you can fly over people if your drone weighs less than 250 grams and has no parts that may lacerate. But it seems to me that a lot of people miss that last sentence. But I'll tell you this. We've flown a lot of events like Ultrafest in Miami and some other large events where we coordinate with the FAA, and there are 3 FAA supervisors that stand right next to us. They're right there. And their job is to assist us and make sure there's no illegal drone activity. But what actually happens, what I found out, is they spend so much time making sure that we are following the rules to the letter. There's 100 other drones going by that they don't even pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, before when Part 107 first came out, we ended up educating these FAA inspectors. They were telling me we could do things that I knew we couldn't. I'm like, you know that we can't legally do that. And they're like, I think you can. And I'm like, no, that was under the old 333 exemption. We're now under Part 107. And so we've had to educate a lot of the FAA inspectors. So as it evolves and changes, everybody that's on top of it expects everybody else to understand. But even the FAA doesn't understand those things. Yeah. It makes it difficult because as the motion picture industry has evolved, they've come up with their legal department and risk management and produce documents that I have to fill out every single time before we go on set. And I'm reading it, and some of it is, they want my 333 exemption. I have to say, look, that hasn't been in effect in 2 years. They're like, but we need it because that's our document. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and we can't fly here because it's 4 miles from an airport. I'm like, no, you actually can fly there. Yeah. I just have to look up what the maximum altitude is in the area. And they have no idea, and they are slow to update.
Yeah, even municipalities. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it almost feels like in the beginning, it felt like the rules were almost punitive to the people that were actually conscious and willing to do the correct thing versus the rogue people. There were no consequences. There was no way to check. There was no penalties. And so if you were someone that followed the rules and wanted to do it the right way, they just made your life extremely difficult for a long time. But the Part 107 with the LANC system, approvals now, even with waiver requests, they're down. I mean, I'm getting mine in like 2 to 3 days, which before, like we were talking, it used to take like 90 if you're lucky to even get a response. And then they would request more information. So that's all changed too. So it's progressing slowly, but there is still a lot of room for improvement, especially for people who are following the rules and are competent and, has everything in place, versus, some guy that just wants to do commercial real estate and doesn't know any better. Anyway, that's my thought on that is
so Robert, talk a little bit about, how are these regulations different from city to city, from county to county, state to state? You guys work all over the world, not just, in Florida. So do those regulations vary depending on where you're going?
Well, sure they do. I mean, every municipality feels like they need to enact some sort of, drone or UAV regulation. And some of it's way off the mark. I mean, it's just like Keith said, they want you to have your 333 exemption. And I think that's right below what's your pager number on the form.
Right, exactly.
It's just, you look at it and basically with most of the corporations and most of the municipalities, they simply have gone in and regurgitated what the best practices are that the FAA uses that we've already passed a test and we're held liable for. I mean, so for a licensed drone operator, if we make a misstep, we can lose our license. I mean, they can pull our license. If you don't have a license, what are they going to do to you? Right. And the fact is they do very little when they find somebody. And but all the municipalities, getting back to your question, they all have a different requirement. All the film offices, they have a different requirement. And some of their requirements are overstepping. They're trying to I don't know if it's legislate, but they're trying to rule make for what is really a federal FAA airspace. It's not their airspace to make rules about. Yeah. They can control maybe where you launch from, where you land, how you're permitted, whether you have the safety protocols in place. They can mandate that, but you don't control the sky, and the FAA does. So we deal with a lot of differing municipalities. I had a job in Monument Valley on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and you can't shoot in Monument Valley because it's a national park. You can fly a big helicopter over it, but you can't do a drone. And but the Navajos had banned drones because people kept flying into those beautiful monument buttes out there and crashing. And so now there's, a bucket full of white plastic trash on the side of it, and they just banned them. So when we needed to shoot there, I had to negotiate with the chief of the tribe to say, let me show you how it's done right. And while I'm showing you how to do it right, we'll take and train 2 of your Native American citizens so that they can go out and know what to look for. They can come and they can work jobs. So when jobs come in, now they have a place that they can be a liaison and help and just watch over these sacred spots with the tribe. But it's crazy. It's all over the place. I had to do the same thing in Telluride. Telluride was out of control.
Interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to offer a point of clarification, and Robert mentioned it, but a lot of times people get confused. No one can regulate the airspace except for the FAA. So if they say drones are banned and you can't fly here, that's not necessarily correct. What they can regulate and restrict is land access, saying that you can't land or launch or land from our land that we control. And a lot of times, if you talk to them, you can get a permit to allow that. But the final authority on flying in the air is the FAA, period, bar none. So anyone that tries to tell you any different from that they're not educated enough to know that the final decision about the airspace lies with the FAA and not a state or a municipal organization.
Well, Chris, have you found that, ignorance is not bliss in this case? So if people don't know, is it easier just to say, forget it, we're just not going to deal with it, so no? I mean, is that kind of the default if they're confused?
So I have a fact sheet that when I run into these stubborn permitting people related to land access, I have a fact sheet that I kind of just send to them that's referenced, and it says, hey, these are the regulations, and I understand that your community or your city has enacted this. So let's put the airspace talk aside for a second, and let's talk about permitting for the production. And then let's go into what I do to set up a, for film production. And let's talk about that. And then after we clear that hurdle, then I'll educate you on the airspace and the actual legalities of it. So, it's kind of, it's a little better to, it's easier to attract more flies with honey than it is with vinegar. So, in this case, you just have to step back a second and say, okay, I understand you think, but this is actually what's going on. Here's your references if you care to read further, and let's tackle it from that perspective.
And now, Keith, let's talk insurance a little bit. I mean, how does insurance for a drone company or a drone operator vary from, your regular production insurance?
Well, it should be aircraft insurance for one thing. And a lot of people use companies like Global Aerospace. So these guys might be insuring a G550 for a corporation, and in turn also insuring your Mavic for liability as well. This brings me to another issue. To make drones legitimate, the FAA had classified them as aircraft. And that helped a lot, but it also hurt a lot, because back when it started, when you tried to get aviation insurance, it started at $10 million because, you were flying a helicopter over a crowd. It wasn't until, the industry moved forward that other insurance companies started handling liability and equipment insurance, that things started to change. But still, that is the one most expensive expense that we have for our business, is the liability insurance. We have 5 million with the option to 10. We also have payload insurance. So when we fly a heavy lift, if you're flying something like a Mavic that has a built-in camera, it's always going to be that. But if you're flying a heavy lift, you may be flying an Alexa Mini one day with ultra primes, and then the next day you're flying a Red Gemini with, Sigma lenses. So for me, I used to have to take the serial numbers of every piece of equipment, send it to the insurance company, get a value, and then pay for that job. So we've moved on so that they just cover whatever I put on my drone up to a certain amount.
Okay.
To have that, though, I mean, we're spending $18,000 a year on insurance. And so it's a big expense. I've worked with some companies doing feature films. We worked in tandem with them where they're spending $70,000 a year on insurance, just because the amount of equipment they're running.
Yeah.
And I think that is the next step in this industry that needs to evolve to a more legitimate number, because right now there's nowhere else to go, and without it, you don't get hired.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Chris,
insurance is expensive for us. We're with Global as well, but it's great when we call them, because they are aerospace and airplane aviation insurers, so they understand what we have. But it's pretty interesting. We carry a standard 5 million, and there are some clients that we have that they want us to have 10 million. So we just buy it for the whole year at that point. But like Keith, I mean, for our normal DICE insurance policy for Starling Productions, which covers workers' comp and all the other stuff that goes with it, our UAV insurance is close to the number that Keith has there. I mean, it's at least 2 times more than our normal insurance policy. So consequently, we charge on our invoices a insurance recoupment fee on it. And it depends on what's the job, how many days, and because we're all punished by it. I mean, if I want to shoot at the Wynn Resort in Las Vegas, I can do pretty much anything on the Wynn property for $2 million, right? With $2 million of GL. Soon as I introduce a drone on it, they got to have $10 million worth. Yeah. I mean, you can have stunt firearms scenes shot in the casino and still just get by with $2 million. But boy, you bring a drone through there, it's like, they're just all freaked out over it. It's really interesting. So it's punitive. I think it was a good word that Chris used earlier.
Yeah. And Chris, let's talk safety overall. There's dangers in just about every aspect of our industry in some way or another. Some are more, obviously, but I would think this has potential to be one of the more high risk aspects of the industry. What are the standard levels of precaution that you guys take?
So it all goes back, it starts in the permitting process. So right off the bat, during permitting, and I address this, and usually I'm working with locations as well. Either I'm locations manager and then switch over for the drone portion, or I'm working closely with locations. So the very first thing is in the permitting process for each location, we establish a safety zone. We call it the exclusion zone. It's marked off and it's only available when we're flying drones. That area is only available and accessible by drone personnel. The next biggest thing that we do is on days that drones are in play, we have a safety meeting. 100%, no questions asked. It's run by me. It's not run by the AD or the first AD. It's run by the drone team. Period. There's no questions about that. And then from there, it's pretty much we try to have, especially for flying a heavy lift, it's essential personnel only, and we try to keep most people at Video Village or base camp just to limit the exposure to people who don't really need to be there. And then outside of that, I also have a document that I kind of forward on to the AD that kind of talks about, it kind of goes into a little more detail about the safety exclusion zone, about the protocols, about, like when drones take over, that's another thing that I like to have is basically then I have control of the set and the radio comms, everything is quiet. The drone team is not to be disturbed. You can't approach the drone until it's all clear. We use commands like clear and arming and take off and land and that sort of thing. It's basically everything goes down to I guess to sum it up, we establish a zone that's the LZ for the drone and the drone team. And then everyone else has to stay back and they don't disturb us while we're flying. So that's the biggest issue for on the ground around the crew and talent as well. And so also we'll have a discussion with talent about what to expect. Those are the biggest things that I find for safety mitigation. It all starts with it starts at the beginning, and it starts with the safety meeting is imperative.
Good. Robert, you alluded to helicopter flying earlier, and compare the two, whether it's the traditional helicopter or drone production. I mean, obviously there is a cost difference, but besides that, what are the main differences between the two?
Are you asking about what they can do and can't do well, or are you asking about the permitting process? Because I think I'll probably just hit that. Yeah,
take it wherever you think is important.
Well, it's a classic example. If you want to shoot, or if you want to fly a drone in Miami Beach, and you want to pull a permit there, their requirements are at least a page and a half for drones. Page and a half. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. Blah, blah, blah. The paragraph for helicopters, please stay above 1,000 feet. That's it. No police officers, no mandatory, everything. And, I mean, that's their choice. It's their jurisdiction. They can do it the way they want. But I don't know that a helicopter's any safer necessarily. But this whole process that you're in right now and you're talking about, and we can get to what they both do well and where to use them, is compliance. And that's another part that's on our invoice. It's like prep. Think of it as a camera prep day. But there's a compliance component to this. And some jobs, and I know Keith and Chris have had the same thing. You spend 4 days dealing with phone calls and paperwork and everything easily. And, that some portion of that has to be billable because it can be very invasive and arduous and just a million phone calls. When you have to issue certificates of insurance to the client, the city, the police department, any other entity there, production, it's crazy. So there's a lot of compliance, and that's the compliance documentation. All happens way before the job happens.
Right. Well, talk real briefly about the differences between what a drone is good for production-wise and what a helicopter is good for.
Well, I think, one consideration is it's the budget. It's obviously a lot less expensive to do a drone for the day, even a heavy lift drone, which is closing in on that price, but it's still half the price at least, or less than flying a helicopter. Drones are great for confined areas, tight areas, and maneuvering in a way that either wouldn't be safe with a helicopter or just would be very invasive to the actual shoot itself. So, but when you have a client that needs to fly and they want to track a vehicle for 5 miles, well, that's not suited for a drone. We could track a vehicle for a distance as long as we can see the drone. And that's what we're limited to by visual line of sight. We always have to be able to see it. So however far I can see it, we can go. Drones can go, 50 to 70 miles an hour approximately, some faster, some slower. But, if you need to go 120 miles an hour following a boat or anything else for any distance, that's where a helicopter wins out.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Keith has
Chris,
a lot of helicopter experience.
Yes. Chris, we live in an age, in our industry where everybody thinks they're an expert. And somebody, as we talked about, you can pass the licensing test to get a drone. You can go buy yourself a drone. That doesn't make you a drone operator. And immediately everybody watches a how-to video on YouTube and says, I'm ready to go. Talk about from a standpoint where you are with as a reputable provider, how challenging is that to be quote unquote competing with the amateurs of the world and trying to make a living and not hurt people and tell clients why they should hire you versus somebody that's a third of the price because they don't have the experience. Talk a little bit about those challenges.
I think it starts with really, I guess maybe approach it from this. If you're a producer or a PC or a PM trying to hire a drone unit, I think you should check out their demo reel, and then you should have a conversation with the operator. And I think you should kind of probe around about their knowledge about being on set, because that's the number one thing that separates a lot of people is the new drone operators. They have zero clue of how a production operates, like zero. And they don't understand the timelines and the challenges and trying to make your day. So that's kind of the first thing that I think is really separates and is a big distinction. The next level down from that goes into your professionalism. As a reputable drone company, I show up with 2 or 3 sets of drones. A guy just starting out has got his Mavic and 3 batteries. What's that going to do for you? So, in order to be a professional, you have to be able to complete the job in the timeline that's been specified for you. And the other thing too is a lot of these guys, you can't give up on set. Certainly these systems have gotten a lot better, but when I started building mine in 2010, I had to troubleshoot my flight controller. I had to troubleshoot my power distribution board. I had to troubleshoot my gimbal and my video transmitter, and then my radio link to the drone. I had 6 separate systems that all I'd have to figure out what it was and either identify and how to fix it. So that's kind of, I guess it also goes into the professionalism is being a true professional. You have to have, you kind of start with the minimum requirement is being able to fly the drone, but that there's that's the tip of the iceberg. Everything's under the surface of what I was just describing. You have to have all this other stuff in place to show up and work competently on set. I think that's the biggest differentiator is people think that they can spend, $2,000 and be in business and work in the film industry. And I can tell you that my Mavic kit, for example, to get it, there's a cost difference between buying the drone versus having a production kit. So my Mavic production kit, I probably got, $6,000, $6,500 invested in it, where most people think they can spend $2,000 or $2,500 or something. So that's kind of the difference, is you have to have backups and spare parts and all the other things to make sure that when you do your job, if something happens, you can overcome it. That's the biggest thing that a lot of people, and it relates to price too. Like these guys the rest of the guys are talking about, we have to recoup that expense when we go on a job, because it is expensive to maintain and operate this equipment, much less keep all the other stuff that has to go with it as being a professional.
And now, Robert, you and I have talked a lot about varying levels of drone equipment as you've tried to educate me. And I know you partner with Keith on some stuff. So let's talk about kind of what is the core competency level of job that you have under your roof. And then when do you need to maybe partner with Keith because he does a little bit more of the heavy lift stuff? So take us through that process and then hand off to Keith, and then you take it from there, Keith.
Yeah, it's a great point. So as we've always used kind of that mid-size, it's called an Inspire series, and Inspire 2, and it has interchangeable lenses, but not an interchangeable camera. But it's a good camera. It does a good job, and it mixes with a lot of things. But some of our clients, the bigger budget clients that come to us with either feature films or international level commercials, they want they want to use the red camera. They want to use an Alexa Mini or whatever it happens to be. They want to fly either a camera that they already have on the show, so it mixes well, or the DP has it and it's a rental on the job, and darn it, he's not going to give up his rental that day to rent something else. But there are certain levels of jobs that expect heavy lift. So, as our business was growing and growing, there wasn't such a thing as heavy lift early on, or at least it wasn't called that. And as people started asking for heavy lift work, we started legitimately looking at everything it takes to do that and to add heavy lift aircraft to our fleet of drones. And the more I looked at it, the more I was like, you know what? That is a specialty within the specialty of drone and aerial work. And we've been partnering and bringing Keith and his team on to our jobs with heavy lift. And we've been to Utah, we've been to Nevada, and we've done some pretty nice jobs together. And it really made sense to me because I do a lot of other things. I produce, I work on arm cars when I can, I do a lot of different things. And so heavy lift is an entirely different animal than anything else. And I'm certainly capable of flying it. I'm certainly capable of operating it, but there is a lot more to it. And I really believe that it's a place for a specialist. And so that's where we started partnering with Keith at Precision Aerial as our heavy lift choice. And so we bring them on the job, and and that goes back to working as colleagues and working together, because Chris or Keith, I'm not worried about them trying to do some sort of sneaky thing and steal a client from us. And frankly, my philosophy is, if someone can steal your client, they weren't your client after all. They were just waiting for somebody else to come along. But I trust Keith. I know they run a top-notch operation. I mean, I've seen their operations. He's out flying that heavy lift, and they are flying their heavy lift. Even when they're not booked on a job, they're out there testing it, refining it, and doing all those things. So, and I know Chris does that as well. So we're thrilled to have Precision Aerial as our heavy lift partner. And you know what? It takes all of the worry off of me. I don't have to go behind Keith or Todd or Christy or Bobby or any of the folks that work there. I know when they're on the job, they got it. And they run a very, very safe, very, very buttoned up operation. And they run it very procedurally. They have a process, they have a procedure, and they follow it, and that's what they do. And so that's what we do in our business. That's what they do in their business. So go ahead,
now,
Keith.
Keith, take it from there. Like, give us a sense. Like, pretend like nobody on here knows what is heavy lift. Describe the difference between the heavy lift side and the other side.
So I guess the easiest way to describe it is a larger drone that can lift multiple variations of cameras and lenses. And it's pretty much the closest way to integrate into a large production using the same equipment they're using on the ground. In fact, the only real difference is the aircraft. The gimbal that attaches, we either use a Ronin 2 or a Firefly Media, which is the same thing they're using on the ground as a handheld gimbal, except it's attached to the drone, and we have long range capabilities of controlling the gimbal and the camera. Other than that, we still follow the same Part 107 rules. All the FAA stuff is the same. All the licensing is the same. The difference is we're dealing with a lot more people. We have a much larger crew that's involved. There's a lot more to go wrong. You know, when I worked on a helicopter, they used to say the helicopter's 2,000 parts that have to work perfectly to fly, and only one has to fail, and it won't fly. And it's the same thing with heavy lift, because now they are multiple systems that you're putting together. They don't come together. They're not always part of it, and they don't always work together, and you have to modify to make it work. So if they're using a Teradek system on set to get video to Video Village, then we need to use a Teradek system on the drone. If they're using ultra prime lenses or master primes or Panavision, then we need to use ultra primes or master primes or Panavision. And if you can't do it with what you have, then in this pre-production process, you better come up with a way to make it happen. And luckily, we've been able to do that. And that's why we constantly test and modify. We were on a major motion picture in Atlanta last year for Marvel. And I talked to the DP for a month and a half prior to getting there about which camera and lens set we were using, what they expected, what the shots were. And we got there and we set up, and the first thing they did was hand me a different lens that was 4 pounds heavier than what they said originally. Immediately, and it wouldn't fit. It just wouldn't fit on the gimbal. And we modified it while we were there, used extra weights. You know, they changed their approach to the shot and involved, you know, full speed flying at the ground with a pull out at the end. And now I've got 4 pounds extra hanging from this drone. And at 50 miles an hour, you know, we needed to make sure that it wasn't going to come apart on the pull away. So, I mean, it's things like that. You know, I mean, if we had failed and not been able to do it, we never would have been called back.
Mm-hmm.
But when it actually worked and you hear applause from Video Village, you know, 50 yards away, you know, it's a good feeling. And I tell people all the time, I can't tell you everything that can go wrong. You just have to practice and practice and practice and test and test and test and modify and try to do things that you're not normally comfortable with, so that when that situation comes up, you can say, okay, I got something in my bag here that can make that work. And like Chris said, you can't give up. You can't give up on set because something's not working. You know, we're doing a job in the Dominican Republic. I just sent out the equipment yesterday. It's one shot that we're doing. And I had to do a carnet list with an amount. And it was $118,000 in equipment that I sent to the Dominican yesterday for one shot. So when you get out there and you've got a 150 person crew waiting for you and they stop, everybody's looking at you. You know, unless the Russian arm's there, you're the coolest thing on set, and they're all stopped to see what you're going to do. And they remember it. They remember it. And if it doesn't work out, if you can't get that drone to take off, or God forbid you crash or something happens, they don't ever forget that, period.
Yeah.
You don't want to you want to integrate into the crew. I mean, I've been on set where they've had their gimbal breakdown and I pulled the gimbal off the drone and kept their shoot alive. That had nothing to do with aerials. They remember things like that. They understand that.
So to everybody in the audience, we got like 2 questions left for the panelists, but then we're going to open it up to all of you if you have questions. So please start using the hand raising function so we know who has questions. We can call on you and get you in here. Robert, you talked a little bit about your time in Las Vegas. Talk a little bit about the process or your company through those years, but you're sitting in your Cinevan. And I want you to specifically talk about that, because that's part of the and more part of this discussion.
Okay. I guess specifically our years in Las Vegas, we ended up out there because my wife, she got recruited by MGM Resorts, and we landed in Vegas literally at a time when Las Vegas was full of new development. We had probably 40 tower cranes on the Strip, trillions of dollars worth of new properties going up. And so we fell into, we already had some customers there, but we really fell into becoming the aerial cinematography provider in Las Vegas with helicopters at the time. So, and we closed the Strip and we learned that. But, the biggest thing is the film office there and the police department and the permit office. They learned that they could trust us to run a safe set. So fast forward, I'm a native Floridian, and we had an opportunity to come back to Florida 4 years ago. And so we came back. We still are a Nevada corporation, but we're back. We landed back in Orlando, and now we just expanded down to South Florida so I could hang out with Keith more. And
he's moving in with me.
Yeah, exactly. So we're down here, but I think one of the things I saw over the years for me, and I went through 42 years of working out of my car, working out of vans, working out of trucks and 4-wheel drives. And, when I put my producer's hat on, I'm sitting there working at my desk, and we've all done that. You've got your laptop against the thing and you're leaning back and you're trying to, check your emails and do a proposal and get an insurance certificate. And so I had dreamed of one of these, I guess, adventure vans for a long time. And the concept is to build a van that had an office in it. So this is a lot like an RV van. There's no bed in here, but I've got, I'm actually sitting at the client table right now. Normally I'm sitting here in front of me with my chair turned around, and I'm working off this table as my desk. And so my wife is an interior architect. And so she took my ideas and plans, and she worked really hard, and she drew and built out this van for me exactly the way I want it. So what we have in the back is an area that is, let's see, there's shelving and there's all kinds of things that come in and out of there, but we have a ramp and we can just roll our carts in. I can configure the back of this as a hair and makeup van. I can configure it as a drone van or just a straight up camera truck van. And we actually even did for investigation discovery. First day I drove this literally off the builder's lot, drove straight onto an investigation discovery set. And we set up 10 COVID PCR testing units right here in the van. So this really makes my job a lot easier. I've got a little private toilet back here and refrigerator, a little microwave, 2 outdoor showers for rinsing humans and gear off. And so this is how the Cinevan came about. And it really just built it for me to make my life easier on set. I was just so tired of working out of the front seat of my car. And now I've got, we've got printers, and I'm on a Wi-Fi cellular booster thing here right now talking to this. It's a pretty smooth conversation. So that's what the Cinevan for. So we just call it the ultra versatile Cinevan. It was not intended to rent out to other productions, but as soon as people found out about it, our phones were flooded with people who want to rent it. And so if I'm not using it, it's for rent, but you have to hire me too. So there you go.
Well, I've seen some of the pictures from 360 degrees. It's pretty cool stuff. So,
Well,
okay.
thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions from the audience. Questions from the audience. So I actually, funny story, is that the last Film Florida Friday, even though I asked about 5 different times, I actually was accused of not letting people speak in one of these. So I'm going to keep asking until we disconnect. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand so I can call on you. But I want to open an open-ended question for each of you. Chris, I want to start with you. What's the future of drone cinematography?
Well, I don't, I'm kind of curious right now. I think the jury's still out, but right now what I see is a lot of FPV cine style. And I don't know if this is here to stay or if it's a fad. That's one of the things related to equipment. I think what we're going to see is we're going to get longer flight times. We're going to get higher payloads, and the machines are going to get smaller. That's just the nature of this business. Yeah, those are two of the things that I kind of see for the future.
Okay.
Kind of certainties, basically.
I agree. It's first person view FPV stuff. At first, I thought it was a fad, but I see it evolving. I think originally it was a fad, but people are finding ways with heavy lift FPV and with the smaller equipment to actually fly over people. I think that it's evolving something that's going to be a niche that's going to be here for a while.
Robert?
Keith and I had this conversation probably 3 years ago when you started seeing, these crazy Johnny FPV videos on YouTube. And, they're flying upside down inside buildings, very acrobatic. So we're seeing more calls for FPV work. And it is not a service that we offer. And I believe FPV work, I mean, it's extremely challenging to do it. You just don't, so Keith talked a little bit about, how you have to assemble a whole, a heavy lift drone. It's incremental pieces, this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece. It's not an all-in-one box sort of DJI product. And so initially the FPV drones started as that. And then people started working on those and modifying them. And now it's still not an all-in-one box product. But, not every production needs a CineWhoop doing, acrobatic work and really high end. But you just don't pick one of those, an FPV drone up and just start flying it well right away. And
right.
I know Keith is putting a ton of time into FPV over the last couple of years, but he and I initially talked about this. We thought it wasn't necessarily a fad, but how many times can you use that sort of shot? And right. We were like, yeah, how's that going to work out? But I'm definitely seeing even just modest budget clients asking for FPV now.
Yeah. I see, what I see in this, and I've said it since the beginning. When it first came out, it was freestyle. People were, flipping and rolling and flying through the smallest things, and they would post their videos on YouTube, and it would look really cool, and you could tell it took a lot of talent. It was difficult. My question was always these guys, because a lot of them would come to me and show up my studio and say, hey, you got work for me? And back then I'm like, it looks really cool, but when the stuff we shoot contributes to the story, we're doing, an establishing shot, or we're tracking a car, we're doing something that tells the story. Nobody looks at a movie or a TV show and says, wow, I wonder what camera they were using or how they're doing that. And that's what right. the FPV world was. And now it's actually coming into its own where it can contribute to telling the story. And it's a huge step, I think. And that's why I think that it's here to stay in a different form.
Yeah. Yeah. So Robert, somebody asked for contact information. And so Chris and Keith have put that in the chat. If you're able to jump over the chat box and just put your contact information so people can get in touch with you or learn more about you. We do have 2 questions here. Christy, I know you're not able to turn your camera on, but if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I work for a film commission, and I've worked with a lot of you guys before on when it comes to adding drones to the permits or what have you. And I've relied on you guys a lot actually to help us update us on the changes to the FAA regulations, because we have a great relationship with the South Florida FAA rep. But they don't inform us when these things change. The same way you guys were saying, they don't always inform you. It's not like a press release goes out to say there's a new way to get the waiver that you need or what have you. So I've been seeing the LAA and C things coming through quicker, but I wasn't aware that that process changed. So thank you guys. I'm so glad I'm on today to know that, to give that advice. But I wanted to ask you, because I do rely on the drone operators to give me a lot of information, but sometimes I'm not sure what is accurate and what isn't, especially for some of the newbies. Is it true, and this might sound like a crazy question, or this might be accurate, as far as things that, like when we want to warn people, if you don't do this correctly, this is what could happen. I've been told before that there is an ability to shut down a drone in the air if it's flying in unauthorized space or it wasn't authorized to do so. That doesn't sound like a real thing to me, but have you guys heard that? And is that the case?
Well, yes and no, if I could take this. If it's a DJI drone, DJI uses their own lock and unlock system. If they do not have authorization to be in an area that requires authorization, they can't unlock the drone and it won't start. That's if nothing's been modified.
It won't start, I see. Okay.
If it's not a DJI drone, it's going to fly anywhere that they tell it to fly, whether they're legal or not. The ability to shut down a drone, and by the way, that DJI unlock system, if you unlock it for a certain area, when you hit the border, the invisible border of that area, it won't go past it. But that's if everything's working correctly. It's a DJI drone. It's a DJI unlock system. As far as an outside agency being able to shut down the drone, we had a company show up at an event that had a drone blocking system in place illegally. The Miami police department hired them to keep drones out of Ultrafest that were not authorized. And nobody told us. And we had a lot of problems with our drones. They were acting really funny to the point where I said, we're not flying anymore until we figure this out. The guy came up to me and goes, yeah, I've got a drone jamming system right over here that I'm using. And I told the FAA administrator that was there with me. And he's like, look, I had a meeting with these guys last week. They asked about it. And I told them it was 100% illegal and we're shutting them down. So even interagency communication, as we all know, doesn't always work. Drone jammers are illegal to be used by anybody. So even though they do work and they are real, they're not legal to use because, again, the FAA has classified drones as an aircraft.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
And now, Alexa, you had your hand raised. If you turn your camera on, I can spotlight your video. Otherwise, just go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm not able to turn my video on right now, but thank you guys so much. This was super interesting. I have a real beginner question because what you mentioned really resonated with me earlier, the fact that there isn't a practical portion to the test. Where would you guys, what would you guys suggest for those of us who are still learning to fly drones and stuff at the beginner level to really get better at the actual hands-on flying? Is there courses you recommend or certain study materials? Like, that's kind of what I'm really curious about, just other than just trying to learn myself, how to just get better at the basics. Thank you.
My suggestion would be get that controller in your hands and fly it. Practice, set up a cone and do the basic box drill where you fly a box. Start off, if you can't do it, fly just a box around it so you can keep your orientation, and then try to fly either a circle or an orbit or a box where you keep the nose pointed at it. And those two skills, and then also practice keeping your orientation where you fly towards you. That's the biggest thing that usually that's the biggest trick the hang up with a lot of new pilots is losing orientation while they're flying. And that's there's no quick way. You have to practice, period. There's no substitute for it. Yeah,
it's definitely stick time and out there and practicing. when I first got started, I set up my own little obstacle course in the park by my house. And you know, I had everything from a hula hoop to fly through to, you know, doing the boxes and circles and everything. But I will say that the best thing you can do is not lock your feet on the ground where you're flying from. I am constantly moving around looking at my drone. And I mean, everybody's got to follow me. I don't care, because I really want to see my drone. I want to understand where my aircraft is in that 3D space. You know, if it's just wide open sky, no big deal. But when you're flying around obstacles and buildings and things, shift your position so you get a little better viewpoint of it. And I'm constantly moving, just looking and watching the drone from there. And then also, I don't know if your drone has an FPV camera, but our drones have FPV cameras on them. Just a pilot's camera. It's the world's worst resolution, but I'm not bitter about that part. But that's what I would recommend. You know, just good. Keep your eye on the drone. And I think a very beginning exercise, Christy, is walk it like a dog. You know, get your drone off the ground and go out in a field and just walk along with it and walk around in different places. That really gives you a feel for what your controls. It's sort of a control exercise. Excellent.
Thanks. Brian, I'm going to go ahead and add a spotlight so you can come on down. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Rick, you're going to be next.
Okay, so far I've really enjoyed your presentation. I do drone as part of what I do. I haven't done any features or anything. I usually work for smaller companies. I've done real estate. What I run into is, and we've already talked about it somewhat, the FAA airspace issues, but also the local issues. And for the airspace, I use an app called Aloft, and they have Lance, and it's a pretty decent app. But as far as local ordinances and local issues, how do you find, like, if you're going to an area where you don't live to do, what do you find is the best resources for finding out what the restrictions are?
You want to take this, Chris?
I think for me, it's pretty simple. Is if it's related to production, if they have a film commission, that's your first stop. Like in my area of the world, when productions come into town, because there's a lot of military airspace, we have a Lance system. One area is open and available, and the other two main areas where productions come in, they have a zero grid over their entire airspace. So you can't just apply through the Lance system to get an automatic approval. So I have standing waivers. And so, like, when productions come into town, like, I'm the resource for them, you know, and that's through our film commission, which is Gail Morgan. I don't know if Gail's on the call today, but she's fantastic about that. Like, if anybody comes in and has any questions, she just refers them straight to me. So I act in my area as a local resource to kind of guide productions as far as airspace regulations, and she can speak to the permitting process on the ground, and if there's further questions. So that would be my suggestion, is if there's a film production office, that's where I would start.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian. I'm going to remove that spotlight, and Rick will bring you down, and we're going to add you. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Rick Cowan. I'm 107 Aviation. I have a drone company in Orlando too. And couple things. One was like safety on sets, which is, I'm a Directors Guild of America person, and when we get on sets, we the number one thing, especially with drones, I always treat a drone as like a helicopter unit. And Chris and Keith and Robert, I work with you, and Robert's fan is amazing. If you ever get a chance to go into it, it's fantastic.
Thank you.
To me, I treat a drone like a helicopter unit, because there are things on it. Everybody's excited about drones, but I'm always like, guys, everybody needs to step away. We're going to do a safety meeting. As an AD, you do a safety meeting, and I always ask my drone pilots, even if I'm not the drone pilot, I go, you tell me exactly what we need to do. That's number one, because it could happen. Robert does the best safety meeting ever. Turn your back to it. You know, he's always like, just, if it's coming at you, turn your back to it. Another thing is, I live very close to a certain magical world, and they have a no-fly zone for drones, and we have tried. And the earlier question was like, what happens when you get close to it? There's a no-fly zone, and our drone will not go any closer than it's allowed. So we back it off and land it. Other than that, I mean, great questions and all that kind of stuff. I see the future as drones being a little bit more, but these heavy lift ones are getting bigger, and the lenses, and like you said, I think that's the future of it, but it's going to be tough. And that's basically what I have to say.
Excellent. Thanks for jumping in, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
All right, everybody. So I promised we'd get Robert back on the road. As you can see, he literally is on the road to a job. So we're going to wrap things up for another edition of Film Florida Friday. Thank you to Robert, Chris, and Keith. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're going to take a break for the summer with Film Florida Fridays, but we're going to be back in September with more. Be on the lookout in August for that registration link. I want to thank all of our Film Florida members for their continued support. If you're not a member of Film Florida, we hope you'll consider joining the organization at filmflorida.org. All three of our guests are great Film Florida members today, so we appreciate their support. Keep up with everything we're doing on our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And finally, please check out the Film Florida podcast on Apple, Google, Stitcher, and the iHeartRadio app. Thanks again for being here, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, John.
See you guys soon.